I'm going to do my best to get out of the way because we're in the presence of greatness, and it is always wise for the host of that to just quietly get out of the way. So what we're going to try to do is simply sort of create the container for a little bit of some autobiography and some sharing of experience and wisdom gleaned along the way, but particularly to facilitate some back and forth conversation, particularly some reflection about the vocation of the body, and Mary as the guest and the greatness gets to just run with it. And I've warned her that she has until the vergers tell us it's time to cut it off.
I didn't know I could wear socks like that.
We're tending to the ceiling around socks in the church these days as well. We'll talk about that in terms of generational change. So thank you all for joining us. This is not only a momentous time in the life of the nation politically, it's also a momentous time in the life of the church, both internally and in terms of the church's vocation in the world. If you're paying attention at all to what's happening with Washington National Cathedral, the church is in a wonderful pinch. We're in a wonderful pinch to really be forced to ask questions about the vocation of the church. What does it mean to be faithful to God? How do we listen in on God and what God's up to in the world? And truth be told, what are all the forces that on the one hand bind us together, but then sometimes keep us from challenging the togetherness to join what God's up to, because that can be disruptive, as you know. And today's conversation that we'll hear about is exemplary of that dynamic within the body, and we just need to name it as a dynamic. It's not a problem, it's a dynamic. It's the nature of togetherness, doing things that matter, around which it can be tricky to get consensus. And then we have to ask, do we have to have consensus before we can do anything meaningful? So these are all wonderful things, and it's the reason I'm part of the church, and the reason this narrative is so exciting to me this morning is, as I've mentioned, and this is my preface, and then I'll get out of the way. I've talked a little bit about the things that I've been able to take for granted, those things that have shaped me as not only a human being, as a husband and father and person of faith, but as a pastor as well, that there are certain things that I've just grown up in the midst of and have had the danger of taking for granted. And one of those things is that when I joined the Episcopal Church at the age of 10, having been invited out of the Missouri Synod Church and welcomed warmly into the Episcopal Church, I was surrounded by women clergy. And the greatness of that is, that's the nature of the reality of the church that I've grown up in, to assume that all of the body is gifted and prepared and called forth for ordained ministry, and we're still working out the implications of that. So that's where the remembrance piece matters, that the work is not done, that if we were to take any of this for granted, were I to take for granted what I showed up into, it would mean that I would stop the work and that we would all stop the work. But the work is ever before us, which is why it's important to hear stories and to have folks who have not only survived being change agents and visionaries and prophets, but have thrived in the midst of it, and that the church is better for it. And so this morning is celebration of that. It is privilege. I do this.
Good.
It's a privilege to stand on the shoulders of greatness and courage and strength. I wouldn't be here doing what I do had this not happened, because I would have said at the age of 10, 11, or 12, this church isn't for me, because I have a strong mother and a strong grandmother, and I just said, if those folks can't be ordained in this church is not for me. And so thank you for making this a church for me. So the floor is yours, and you've got some story time. And I will run the microphone as is helpful. So welcome, and I'll let you run with it.
Thank you, Paul.
Yeah,
very,
thank
very
you so much.
Thank you for trusting me. Being here, my memories are flooding so much. I hope I don't overwhelm, and I hope because there are always more stories to tell. But I want to start by acknowledging Mary Bailey. Mary read the Old Testament lesson at my ordination 40 years ago, and as Mrs. Ronald Bailey. And we can't note that without recognizing our wonderful Ron Bailey, who I hope many of you got to know. Ron was particularly known for his Wayback Machine, where the children would go into this wonderful thing he created and you go back in history to a particular time. So I don't want this totally to be a Wayback experience up to today, but I do have I have two vivid stories that I want to tell to get us all to reflect upon, because this isn't about me, this is about us. And it's about people like Mary who have been there since that beginning, and it's the people here that I met today for the first time. And that movement that the Dean talks about, which I think is so wonderful. And I'm just going to throw in a little sideline that I hope isn't too discouraging, but I often believe, yes, indeed, the Episcopal Church ordains women. But sometimes they're not particularly glad we showed up. And being in the Diocese of Southern Virginia, I can affirm that I have gone backwards in that regard. And talk about not being glad you showed up is kind of the name of the game back there in many ways, even though they have female clergy. And they didn't ordain them until maybe 5, 6, 7 years after General Convention allowed it. So I want you to have a sense of how lucky you are, and I think Paul names that in a way that I'd like you to all rejoice in. So, 2 stories. The first person I ran into this morning when I arrived here was Charlie. And in the Wayback Machine, the Charlie of 40 years ago was Ted Westergaard. And I don't know how many of you remember Ted, but Ted was a marvelous bald-headed gentleman who was just a gentleman beyond everything. He wore, as sexton, he wore a crisp white shirt all the time and a bow tie. And I had just come back, this was probably 1970. And I had just come back from serving 2 years as secretary to the Bishop of Papua New Guinea, which was our companion diocese at that time. And I spent a year traveling around the world and on the way home and saw a lot of the Anglican Church at work throughout the world. But I did not have clue one about what I was going to do. Not clue one. I mean, and women's ordination was just kind of in the air, but it wasn't something I particularly was aware of. And I came, when I was back here my first Sunday, Ted greeted me. He was the first person I saw as well that Sunday. And he said to me, leaning on his broom, he said, well, now you've been a church school teacher, a parish secretary, a secretary to the bishop, now what, a missionary, now what are you going to do, go to seminary? So I want you to know that the seed of that idea of your community came from Ted. Okay? Charlie. Second story. About maybe 3 years ago, I'm in the Diocese of Southern Virginia, which is the Tidewater area, and Williamsburg, where I live. And I was supplying at a church called Emmanuel Church in Hampton. And the organist's name was John, and I always greeted the organist when I supplied at a place, because we were leading worship together, and we don't have teams in Virginia. We had to get our signals straight, when do we start, etc. And so we talked about those things. And then at one point in the service before the announcements, the bell choir played. Now you have to remember, I was Mary Belfry when I was here for 8 years. And then I got married, and I was married Hansley. And just a side note, I said to the, there's an old book that had a list of all the clergy, and I called them when I got married, and I said, can you put Belfry C. Hansley? C. Hansley, like they did in my Mount Holyoke stuff. They always put your married name, but they had your maiden name there because that's who you were in college. And they said, oh, we don't do that. We don't keep the gender of our clergy. We don't have a way to do that. So I said, so I've lost 8 years of my professional life, because nobody's gonna, if they don't happen to know I got married, they don't even know what happened to me. So anyway, but they played the bells, they did a bell, and when it came to announcements, I had to say something. I had to say, I can't tell you how much I love bells. And it is such a treat to hear these bells. And my maiden name was Belfry, so clearly that's something that's very precious to me. Because I said that, and only because I said that, John came up to me after the service and he said, do you know, I was your acolyte at the very first service you celebrated at St. Mark's Cathedral in Minneapolis. He would have been a teenage boy, and that mattered to him, and he remembered it. And if I hadn't said my maiden name, we would have never heard that story. So those two stories, I hope, give you two kind of focuses for what I hope will be our conversation. One is the seedbed is here. You all, and I hope in the little thing I wrote for the whatever, you'll get a sense of that, because I can't tell you how wonderful it is to be in your midst, because you love me into being as a priest, and to be able to celebrate 40 years. You know, you can't, except for those 15 that were regularly ordained, there's not many of us that can celebrate 40 years. So 40 is kind of, don't look for 50 though, but 40 is, and so to do that here, and I just can't thank you enough for your welcome for that. And to allow me to preside in the midst of you all is just, you know, I've always believed in the priesthood of all believers, and part of the role of the priest is to say what's true for us all. And so standing up there is to me a representative of the priesthood of all believers, but you choose people to do that in the name of you all. So I hope that nothing that you see up front with, I mean, this team, I just love it. It's just remarkable. As much as Doug Fontaine used to always say, you know, trying to organize cannons is like, you know, trying to herd cats. And I'm sure that Siri it feels that way sometimes, that she's trying to get us from all directions. But that sense of, I have, until maybe a month ago, 2 months ago, I had never had a deacon serve me. So I had to set the table, count the wafers, do everything. And and the gift of doing your part in a whole, we were responsible for the whole before, alone. And if you even remember, there was a time when the only voice you heard was the priest. And hear lay voices. And I was looking at my ordination thing, and as I said, there was Mr. and Mrs. Leonard Addington were ushers, and Mr. and Mrs. Lowell Johnson, and Mrs. Ron Bailey, and so there's one change, and who would have guessed that was 40 years ago that we were derivative of our husbands. So lots of things happening, and that we didn't have a new prayer book. We didn't have a 79 prayer book. So, you know, it's typed up in this little thing. And it just occurred to me all the different changes that have happened in that 40 years. This is terrible. One more thing. When I was ordained a deacon, actually, that's another story, but the certificate I got was, we ordained our brother Mary. We sent him off. And then Kathy Cunningham, which some of you may remember, was taking calligraphy. And when the time came for priesthood ordination, she went to the bishop and she said, "It's not going to happen again. I want to do your certificate." So she handed the whole of the certificate. So she didn't quite put it in beloved sister, but she did say beloved instead of beloved brother. And we had the pronouns right. But so those two documents to me are almost historic documents, because they in themselves say, but it was you all that they saw that difference. Someone in this congregation and community of faith saw that and cared about it. So I carry you with me. And the gift you gave me when I left after 6 years here was that year, I know this is out of favor because it's heaviness, but that wonderful processional cross with the two Marys, you gave me the head of one of them. I mean, you didn't cut it off, but you had the head of one of the Marys. And so that's at the center of my household. So, and everywhere I've been, you've been. So I thank you for that. So anyway, there's a kind of so what's it been like for you all, too? I mean, we can have some back and forth here, but what can you remember some of those differences, those of you that were here 40 years ago, or those who are brand new to this and like Paul, say that this is the way it's always been. I wouldn't come to a place that didn't have women doing this. So sharing in this. And it's wonderful to look out and see the mix that's here right now. It's great. So anybody have some goal? You were there at the beginning.
Well, I was just thinking, supposing that the Episcopal Church had never authorized the ordination of women priests. And so I'm going to mention a few names and just think of,
Wonderful.
if there would have been no women priests, we would not have had Mary Belfry. And think of what image comes to your mind, but Rona Harding, with Stodgill, Gail Morris, Anne Maloney, Jean Parker Vale, Margaret Otterburn, of course, Sarah Hustad. I don't know if I'm forgetting anyone.
Well, you're good. Cynthia.
Yeah, Anna. Yeah, of course, Anna. Harris Baccarelli. That's right. I thought I was forgetting.
And you're kind of forgetting Cindy Peterson. She didn't serve
Cindy
here, but she
Peterson.
came on in this parish.
Yeah. And of
Janet
course,
Wheelock.
Jenna Wheelock. Yeah. Okay, I don't have
Maggie Muldoon.
Yeah.
Maggie Muldoon.
Catherine
Catherine Lewis, yeah, that's right, yeah. Just one story. There was one time when Mary had charge of the youth group. It was like we were going to have a middle school, like a retreat, like an overnight Friday night to a Saturday retreat. It was going to start about 5:30 in the evening. And so the kids came, girls and boys. They came to the church, and Mary was going to start with a Eucharist, nice quiet Eucharist and everything. But then coming into the church parking lot, there were some huge trucks with all sorts of lights, and they said like CBS or MGM or something. What's going on? Well, they were making a movie up in the sanctuary, and there was a woman, a movie star. What was her name? Linda. I can't remember. But anyway, this movie was going on upstairs. Connie Selig. Yeah. Okay. And so. So the girls were just going crazy because of this, woman who was this movie star here, and they were making this movie, and so what do we do, and well, we're going to have a Eucharist, and they were kind of bouncing all over, and so Mary, in her wisdom, said, okay, well, let's see if we can go upstairs and maybe just, if the kids could just watch some of the scenes up there. And so that's what happened, but so from Mary, it's like when Mary was ordained, it was like we knew we had to, it's kind of serious to worship God and teach and preach others about God, but yet we don't take each other seriously. And so
Now wait a minute. I do not remember that at all. Are you sure you're not confusing me with somebody? I mean, Rona was, now this is interesting. Rona followed me. And she said to me one time, I was so mad at you because all people did was want me to be like you. And they wouldn't let me be who I was. So that was part of your learning process too. And mine, because finally the last place, I was the first woman wherever I went. That was the vocation really. But I did an interim at a parish, St. Matthew's Chesterfield, which was a church plant. And it's the first time I've ever followed a woman. Ever. And I knew what Rona meant. I knew what Rona meant. They wanted me to be Martha, and I wasn't Martha. And yeah, clear, yeah. So I began to recognize how do we, I mean, it's so nice to hear all those names because you recognize there could be no more different women. And when I was in seminary, there were 4 women in my class. And, excuse me, yeah, 4, and 1 who was MTS. But when we did field work, we all, in our junior and senior year, we had to go out to a local parish and work on Sundays. And there were maybe 40 in our class, and 4 of those were women. So St. Patrick's Church in Washington, D.C. was the place, what? Was the place where I got to do field work. And the interesting thing about that, out of those 4 women in my class, one was named Blanche, can't even think of her last name now. She was the most serious-minded person. She had fought in Wisconsin to get even allowed to go to seminary, much less. I mean, this was before women could be ordained. But Blanche and I had the most opposite personalities that any 2 people have. And she and I, and a classmate named Alan, all went to St. Patrick's to interview. And we all assumed that they would choose Alan and one of us. But Kit Sherrill decided that no, he was going to take 2 women because he wanted from the start people to know we're not all alike. What a sight. Now, one interesting connection there. You know who in this parish came from St. Patrick's in Washington, D.C.? Cindy and John Buchman. They've been my friend. I met them before I even was ordained. So they have been my friends for all these years. Back when I baptized their 2 children. And I was back here in the 90s when David was confirmed, and I got to be his sponsor or whatever. So just look at, it's like 4 degrees of separation in the Episcopal Church, not 6. But just look at all those places that have fed into here. And you each bring something from somewhere to that too. And that makes this community more than we can ever imagine together.
Mary, do you mind? I want to pick up on something
Yeah.
that you mentioned, which is the cultural artifact of the ordination certificates and the language built into them. And it strikes me that would be a fascinating, really quick crowdsource, just popcorning out those things we recognize. Not unlike that, those things that we not only at the same time we're taking for granted, those things that we've changed, like for example the fact we change our civil documents around marriage now, for example. We've got all these cultural artifacts that present to us, years from now when we're scraping back through the artifacts, they present to us what was the thinking and the function at the time. That is such a perfect example of something that the church just kind of did. Never was particularly self-reflective about it until it had a mirror held up to it, which was a member of its own body who said, I should be doing this. And the church saying, we agree. And what's everything that needs to respond to that? So I'd be fascinated if you wouldn't mind just sort of floating out not only your own experience of other little things that the church had taken for granted that you recognized you were kind of bumping against, not unlike that, and also inviting from the group those other things that we might recognize like that.
Yeah.
What are those artifacts that we have experienced over these last 40 years that either have been tended to, obviously need to be tended to? What are you seeing in the church right now? Those things we take for granted.
Well, okay, I can speak. This is just pretty simplistic, I would guess, but the Book of Common Prayer, I still, every weekend go, we still have him, and the pronouns are still male, and I think we do a good job.
Italics.
And correcting, as a community, which is wonderful, but, someone to pick that up, that is still there, and it's a bit surprising to me as a fairly new member of the Episcopal Church.
Totally agree. You'll be delighted to know the Standing Commission on the Liturgy and Music is tending to a book, whatever book looks like. Yeah, that's an excellent point. What other examples?
At the time Doug Fontaine retired, he was asked what kind of things should be done. As it happened, our daughter was being married at the same time. And during the rehearsal, there was the altar all torn up because the altar was being moved forward. and they had to install new pavement and reset the whole altar. And we looked at the construction and said, are they going to be done by Saturday? And they were. The late Henry Hoover was one of our guests. And I said to Henry, what do you think of what we've done to the altar? And he was standing down in the nave and he said, doesn't look any different to me. I said, let me show you the difference. I think that's one important thing because Doug said the celebration is to the people, with the people, not for the people. The other thing I mentioned to Mary, and this would be while we were going through this liturgical reform thing, we had a very important session down here describing how the baptism service was going to become part of the main service of the church, rather than something separate but unequal. We went upstairs and were informed that there would be a baptism after the service.
Just one thing, just I saw Doug like yesterday, which was really powerful, because of all people, I wanted to thank him. But, because he saw things other people didn't see too, but he knew, he also knew you all did, so, before I preached, this is when I was speaking, but for the first time, he took me upstairs on a Friday afternoon and he said, get up in that pulpit. And he sat in front of me, he said, okay, now talk to me for 20 minutes. You're gonna stay there 20 minutes. I want you to jump up and down in it, I want you to touch it, I want you to twirl around in it, I want you to do whatever you want there. But I want you to know that you belong there and that you're at home when you're there, okay? So that was one of the great gifts, but I have not, this is the first time I've ever celebrated here behind the altar, looking out. So I said, so Siri and I got together on Friday afternoon, and she and I jumped up and down and did all sorts of things behind the altar so I could feel at home there. But, you know, it was really, and I haven't done right one since I can remember. You know, but, sorry if I tripped over a few things there. But then again, when I went to seminary, it was the 1928 prayer book. So that's all we knew. And we went through liturgical renewal together. And one of the great joys I had here was that I had to teach about the new prayer book and the liturgical changes. So anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to.
I first came here in 72 and had 3 teenage children. My daughter Beth, who is now Elizabeth Lippert and still comes to church here, bugged Dan Pearson. She said, I was an acolyte at St. George's. I want to be an acolyte. Well, we've never had girl acolytes. She kept after him so long, they finally put her at the 8 o'clock service on a Sunday morning. And I came and sat near the front. And as she walked up, 2 ladies, probably wearing hats, sat behind me and said, ah, it's a girl. And I turned around and said, it's my daughter, isn't she wonderful?
That's a fantastic story. I see 2 over there. I'll grab 1 here. I'll run.
I still cringe when I hear someone say, we have a woman priest. Did you ever hear anybody say we have a man priest?
Hey, speaking of taking for granted, it's buried in our language, is it not? And we need to have some gall to name it.
I've lived here for 40 years, and one of the first things I did when I moved here was sing for your ordination. I didn't belong to this church, I just came here for the ordination.
Fabulous. We raised our hearts together. Thank you.
On a lighter, more practical note, we could talk about clergy shirts for women.
Yeah.
Okay. My body is not like a man's body, and still today it is hard to find shirts that don't make us look like men. And I don't know why, but it's true. I know you don't have that problem.
Actually, the shirts don't work for me either. We've got women's spear, we don't have men's spear shirts yet.
Yeah.
Right? It's all these boxy shirts, we need more lycra. Can we do this and then right over here?
Couple things. I shared one with you on Friday. When I was a very scared, frightened 13-year-old boy, my mother brought me to this new church, and I was freaking out on my way here. Then until that day, I was a Roman Catholic, so I was like, what's going on here? You know, and it was Mary. And interestingly enough, today I'm shadowing as a Eucharistic minister for the first time. And it's Mary. You need to come more often. And the second thing, my mom, who brought me there, this woman named Maggie Muldoon at the time, I think that was her name then, but she's now the Reverend Mary Muldoon that I had spoken of earlier. And Rena, she makes her own. So okay, so if you just want to learn to sew, or I'll give you her address and she'll make them for you.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but when I first came to St. Mark's, the vestry was all male.
I'm certain that's true.
Till the 60s.
Is this all right, Mary?
Oh, absolutely.
Jump in on any of this.
One thing I want to jump in on is one of the questions I've been asked more than any place else, especially in Chicago. What do we call you? Okay? And as if that's mine to answer. The church has to say, what are you going to call us? I mean, that is a tough question, but nobody's looking at that one. And there's so many teaching points in that one. So many. What does the Reverend mean? What does Father mean? I don't particularly like Mother. My husband used to say, Mother Hansley, that just reminded me of my mother-in-law. And so, but seriously, what terms do we use to acknowledge that title? And why do we have a title and you don't? What does it represent? That whole complex of things, I think, is a biggie. I've been called Father. Which actually I liked, because for that person it assumed that I was a priest in whatever that person understood in that word. But I wanted to say, I hope. I don't look like a lady. But anyway.
I have two things that stick in my memory.
Oh, Sally.
Oh,
Sally.
One is, I was born and raised in the Episcopal Church, and my mother was not interested in women's ordination at all. And for me, one of the most moving moments was at this altar to be able to serve her Eucharist as a Eucharistic minister. That was, wow. And I think it changed her forever also. I think we both wept. The other thing is, I was the first woman usher. And I remember distinctly being criticized one Sunday morning because I wore a light colored suit. That was not allowed. I should have had dark pinstripes or something.
I think in line with this conversation about assumptions, and we were talking about gendered roles on vestry and ushering, it's important that you know that I'm an artifact here. So years from now, as you're looking back on what's with all the men, particularly white, cisgendered, heterosexual men, that's to be paid attention to as an artifact of assumption for the search process. So I don't want us to lose that.
And in follow-up to Sally's memory, I haven't been here that long, but what I love about this congregation is the fact that the first female warden for St. Mark's was Jean Clark. How many of you know Jean Clark?
Yeah.
Well, at the same time that Jean Clark became the first female warden of St. Mark's, the first head of the altar guild was Carl Hawker.
And Doris Nowlin, Dick's mother, was the first female on the then called vestry. Sarah Nowlin, too.
Yeah.
Sarah claimed her as well. Nancy.
one more story about mother and father for us girls who happen to be priests, some of us, but you. Jeanette Picard was in a cancer ward once with a dying man and the family looked at Jeanette and said, "Can we call you Father Picard?" And she said, "Sure." That story was told at her memorial upstairs when she died by former Bishop Chet Talton, who was her priest until she became a priest or was regularized.
That was that was a powerful reality because, you know, it's a very partially political statement in a way when you say when were women first ordained. And there was a time where you said a lot about yourself, whether you said 75 or 77. Because the women that were the Philadelphia 11 were 75, and then there were the Washington 4. So there were 15 women that were ordained regularly before 1976 when the General Convention voted in favor. And that was courage. That was courage. And one of the things that you may not know, which I think is another interesting thing, is that Bishop McNary had a bit of a quandary when they allowed for women's ordination, because he had Jeanette Nalla and he had me. And so what his hope was, and we have a letter to this effect, his hope was that we would do one big ordination service, and Jeanette Nalla and I would be part of the presentation at the beginning, because of course the part of their ordination that wasn't, why it was irregular was that that part was not part of their service. They just had the laying on of hands by the priests. I think, I sit lightly to that, I'm not sure I'm right. They might have had, the people that were there probably presented them, but the church officially or organizationally did not, that first part. So his hope was the three of us would do that, and then I'd have laying on of hands. And this cathedral said, nope, we want to do our own. And so there was an anxious little bit of split there, because it was, I'm being tacky here but with my metaphors, but they were bad little girls, and I was a good little girl. And they didn't want me besmirched by those bad little girls. You know, and that was a sad part of, but part of this journey, and a powerful part. So when you think about, you know, I even felt funny, how do I name this? Because yes, mine was the first ordination in Minnesota, full-fledged. Theirs was in Philadelphia. But I don't want them to be forgotten either, and I don't know how you do that, but please don't forget them, because they were the ones that paid extraordinary price, and they led the way in ways that I think got into our psyches, because they met here. They met in the old library, the dean's office. They met in your office, which was the library, and it was a movement to the ordination of women or something, and they worked hard for that 76 convention. So again, this place was the welcoming place. And then one humorous thing we were laughing about last night when we were telling stories, Doug Fontaine had a unique sense of humor, which we all brashly liked. And when convention was going to be here, I was a deacon on the staff, and a lot of people wanted to use the cathedral for special services. And there was one Anglo-Catholic group whose name I don't remember.
Coalition for Apostolic Ministry.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, yes, Coalition Family. And they wanted to have their Eucharist for intention for this vote of General Convention here. So what Doug did was make me as deacon in charge of all special services at the cathedral. And so being able to say, well, you know, just be their servants. And they just didn't know what to do. And we have plenty of chalices, and our altar guild's there to help you. We'll provide the bread and the wine. You know, they brought chalices from all over everywhere because they didn't want to use ours. And they also brought a plexiglass altar that they shipped in and asked us where our loading dock was. That was one of my questions. Where's your loading dock? So we had this plexiglass altar that was in the center between the choir pews. So, there was an interesting time in this cathedral, again, hosted with great generosity of spirit, those people who were praying, really assuming God's intention was not to have this happen. And we had a lot of nuns A lot of nuns came to that service to pray as well for us, for the intention. It was really exciting. So the Catholic community, Roman Catholic community was a piece of that as well.
So, good morning.
Good morning.
When someone grows up, they go from, for example, in a career, they go from an idea that they want to be an astronaut or something like that, right? And then there's some point where this idea becomes a transition of a belief and how you talk and how you present yourself, and you become that personality or that thing that you now become a belief in. I was curious from your standpoint, because it sounds like, I don't know you very well, but that you're one of the first women, is what I'm gathering from the conversation. I'm curious for you, how you made that transition to from an idea like this would be cool to do, to like you are actually is, or you are that. I'm curious.
I'm thinking in two metaphors. One is idea becoming event, which is what I think you're talking about. And I think, isn't that our journey of all of us in the church? We live in the given of this event. One of the reasons I don't like to give out sermons is because they're an event. They're not something to read. And it's different because today's different depending on who's here. It would be different if any one person were here. Things are evoked in the life of that community that change us. So this is all our journeys, in a way. But then another thing, we often talk about vocation and we think about it pretty singularly, like it's all about what you want to do when you grow up, kind of thing. But I find that for me, the journey to priesthood was totally the opposite of that. It wasn't my idea, it was all of yours. It was this place, it was the clergy, it was Ted, it was the sexton who was the first one that planted the idea for me. And I didn't get it. I responded because I didn't know what I wanted to do. So there's also that other side of the story. And the press loved the story about the women that knew from the time they were 3 they wanted to be ordained. I didn't have a clue. And so that's why you all held that for me. You all brought me into being to do that. And I think that all of us have had that kind of experience. The person that trusts us, sees something in us we can't see for ourselves. And I think that is important to recognize, that call is always, well, obviously the call comes from God and we respond, but we respond individually and respond as a community. And you can't do one without the other. And so what we're talking about today is how those two keep intersecting and continue to for each of us as parishioners. And that's why it's so exciting for me to see that that when I came back and realized, my gosh, pictures of people, and it was just so much alive. Now I lived that when I was here, but there's still something in this welcoming that I hope does that for everyone that comes. This place loves people into being like God loves people into being. So idea becomes event in each of our lives in that mutual engagement one to another.
This is a quick follow-up on curiosity that you brought up, that you said when you were 3 you didn't know you wanted to be who you are.
No, I was saying that part, but well, the women that did think.
Right.
I didn't have any of that, but the press loved the people that knew.
Right.
As a distinction I was making, that was the way we think that a vocation is. I've known, and I strive for that. I wanted to be an astronaut, so I'm going for it. Well, there are a lot of people that didn't know they would. Read or go see certain hidden figures. Go here, see it. And then you will see a lot of people that knew what they wanted to do. But, and you see the community loving or not loving them into being, and seeing what they held. I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Did you get a chance to?
So, Mary, I've got the unenviable job of paying attention to the clock, and I apologize. The vergers are going to start swarming here shortly, and so I want to beat them to that. But I wondered, so the story about this sort of active resistance in the midst of hospitality from the story of the CAM gathering, as as some folks know well, there's a similar dynamic happening at the Washington National Cathedral.
Yes.
It is the question about hospitality, how do we exercise our best selves as broad church, all God's people. We're sort of witnesses to God's radical hospitality and love. And yet in the midst of that affirmation, voice and embody challenge, as in that instance. I wondered, that's one of those great learnings that I think if we miss that kind of funny little story, actually, pointed story, we might lose sight of the possibilities that we've learned. We've exercised some new muscle over the years about how to resist and witness to what we think God's doing, rather than do what our culture is doing, which is simply divide. But that we come together and we both affirm and challenge together. I wonder if you could say anything about other particular learnings along with these 40 years of resistance, challenge, affirmation all together that we carry forward with us in the years ahead. What have we learned?
Well, what a nifty question. I just off the top of my head, I'm wondering, I live in Williamsburg, Virginia, and my husband was from Virginia. And having grown up in Minneapolis, I grew up in Hennepin Methodist Church, and I remember, I lived in Edina, 99 and 44, 100% pure. And we maybe had one Chinese thing. Hennepin at one time, it decided that Joyce Methodist Church, black church, was being demolished for the freeway. And the question to Hennepin was, well, should we invite them to join us? Okay. Being back here has been strange to me because in the places I've been in the last couple of days, I haven't seen a lot of African Americans. I haven't seen anything but white. And I'm used to not seeing everything white, being in Virginia. And my best friend there now is a woman who is committed to racial reconciliation and has committed her 8 years of retirement. And she's wooing me in that direction of learning to stand in ways that are new. I don't know that. So those awarenesses and the context you're in. So sometimes if you're not feeling that, choosing to put yourself in the center, going where that tension is part of what we can do too. Williamsburg has become a different place for me because I see the people that visit Colonial Williamsburg, I see the kids at William and Mary, and they're quite diverse. But the history of slavery, Virginia is a place that closed schools for 5 years rather than integrate. And one of and the Diocese of Southern Virginia is doing in their services of repentance and reconciliation locally, they have some hard work to do because when Prince Edward County closed its school for 5 years rather than integrate, where did the whites take their kids? To the Episcopal Church, who welcomed them, and they set up the white schools in the Episcopal Church. So one of the things that is pulsing in Virginia and is new for me is that recognition. My husband grew up in a segregated school. I'm learning things about him I never knew. So I'm finding myself in those uncomfortable places. And in a sense, over the 40 years, I'd have to say, if you're the first wherever you go, you're going to be uncomfortable. I've been fired 3 times, twice in this diocese, when I was in interim. And when you do interims, you know that's just going to be part of it. You've got to weather all of that. But those are the opportunities for God to break us open, those cracks, those vulnerabilities we feel, where we know full well how much we need God's empowerment and for justice. And that's new to me. Now I'm aware that it's justice. I wasn't aware it was a justice issue when I was ordained. In fact, I was so naive, I didn't think it mattered that we were women. So my 40 years has been finding out that yes, indeed it was. I learned that just as much as anybody did. I didn't have that vision. Those 15 women did that knew. I didn't know the difference it would make. So I don't know if that's a little bit of rambling, but oh, final word, just thank you. Just thank you. Thank you for welcoming me back. One of the things that clergy do is hear everybody else's story. Because that's part of what we're for, to delight in everybody else's story. But when I was in seminary, they told us never to tell our own. Don't talk about yourself. So for years, you just felt kind of stifled because your job was to listen to everybody else. So I feel like this is an opportunity to tell my story to people that maybe know what I'm talking about and care. And so that is an experience that I don't know how to say thank you enough for giving me the space to do that, for letting me kind of jump up and down. And I hope within that, I mean, I love the responses you all made. I hope you feel something about that in your lives for the places of what this community does for you. And I just thank Paul for trusting me to do this, and I'm just tickled to be here. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Paul asked me to offer a prayer at the end, and so let us remember the presence of God and pray. Lord, we thank you for this community, which in ways small and big has done so much to welcome people and empower people, and to empower people like Mary to become who they are. And we thank you for the community that is here now, that welcomes Mary back, celebrates her ministry, offers her our love. We thank you for Mary, whose ministry has been speckled, sometimes dark, but has enlightened many. And we ask you to continue to bless and guide her in this wonderful and sometimes dark church that we love so much. We pray in Christ's name. Amen.